Hello everyone. Hope you are doing well. So today we'll be discussing the lecture number 5, which titled "Issues and Challenges in Planning and Architectural Research." And this particular lecture, what we are going to learn the common issues and challenges in planning and architectural research. And this is something that based on my experience so far, what I have seen in my own PhD career, after that post PhD career doing research, and also recently what I have been observing for my research scholars. So some of the issues that we'll discuss, and then also try to understand that where we should get prepared to overcome such kind of challenges. So in this case also the need of appropriate research methodology by which at least you can able to overcome some of the challenges, and then we summarize our lecture. So I have listed down into different broad category of the issues, where the first one, not in particular order, but to start with, yes, the data availability. That is another challenge. Quality of data. Even if we get some data from some sources, whether that is reliable, should we use it, or is it okay to use it? So it's not only sometimes the amount of data, there may be inconsistency and other thing. Then you have something called the issues with the interdisciplinary collaboration. So now the world is all the problems that in planning and architecture, it is not like only one department that can solve. Say if something that you want to make a building performance really efficient in terms of energy, so probably there it is the field where the architects they are working, maybe they are the mechanical engineer they are working, maybe the people in electronics they're working to find out certain kind of sensors and other thing. So it is interdisciplinary in nature, and in sometimes making that collaboration is a challenge. Then sometimes it is also challenge for a sustainability integration. So we talk enough about this, and probably you also are using the same thing called sustainability in all aspect: sustainable design, sustainable building, sustainable planning. So this sustainability features, or especially if we talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, so we try to figure it out. And many a times, like probably the scale is mismatch and all, so there is some issue. Then the research which involves the community engagement, there are certain challenges, we'll discuss that. Sometimes it may be the regulatory constraint, that some of the solutions that you are thinking of may not be feasible due to the regulatory constraint. It may be the technological advancement. Each day a new things are coming up. So you started with certain kind of research and try to find out certain technology, and by that time you achieve to certain thing, maybe that thing is getting obsolete. So that is another threat. Budgetary constraint, this is another important aspect, that many a times, like you know in absence of a proper budget or lack of fund, which can hinder the research. Time constraint, this is also very important aspect that we'll learn. Lack of access to the research facilities, this is something whenever say I say that okay, I belong to the institution where I can get maximum of the facility and resources, but maybe it is not common for all the researcher. Maybe there is some issues to access the journal website, or there is no subscription of certain journals. So lack of such kind of research facilities sometimes also hinder the research process. And then appropriate research methodology, which can help you to figure it out some of the problems. Now we'll discuss one by one and try to understand the aspect of it. Now when you say data availability, lack of reliable and up to date data can hinder the research efforts. Say I give you very practical example now. Those who are doing research in planning, and where you are considering the population as one aspect, and as because now we do not have any census data, right? The data that we have, latest data is 2011 data. So due to COVID and other reasons, so the still we do not have the census 2021 data. So for such kind of case, what is happening, that we are estimating, so we are making projection, so we don't have the data in between, so that may give some kind of erroneous result, or maybe sometimes that can hamper our research. So in such cases, what are the different issues with the data availability? Incomplete data. So in incomplete data, you have information but it is not complete. Suppose whatever you required, it is not there, right? So if you just try to get a data, say for example, you just try to understand the sale of any product, okay, for particular company, that you try to observe the sale pattern. Now in that case, you find that some of the month the data is not recorded. So this incomplete data can give you some sort of assumption. You just make certain kind of projection. It can be some kind of trend analysis that you apply, so which may not give you the desired result. Sometimes the data is outdated, is a very common thing, that okay, you want to find out some kind of data in particular city, that the accident data, or the, you can say that motor vehicle registered data. So if you don't have the updated data, so you just rely on something like old data. Say for example, in a city, you try to understand the mode share. Mode share means different type of vehicles, like what percentage is bus, what percentage people are using the auto rickshaw, private car, etc. So in such cases, say for example, like you have one information that is recorded in 2013, and many such kind of cities now, after 2015-16, they got this e-rickshaw. So maybe in your city also you must observe that e-rickshaw. So that was not in that particular data. Now in today's time, if you want to rely on that particular secondary data, so then it is wrong, because that data is not available with you and you cannot assume it like that. So for that you need to rely on the primary data, and that too also for a large scale it is difficult. Many a times it will be something, the limited geographical geographic coverage, that your data is available world wise, or maybe it is like population data is available world wise, but within the world, that if there is some kind of further division, neighborhood, so probably you don't have, or maybe some cases you have the data at the district level but not at that particular word level data. Sometimes it is something, the restricted access to data, that even if the data is there but it is restricted. Maybe sometimes like you can purchase the data, but if you don't have the fund, so you much more normally we rely on the open source data. So for that also it is having a restriction. Data silos, that data are available and you will find that for similar data you have different departments, different sites, they are showing different kind of figures. Then it is much more confusing which one to be picked up. It's not like taking a average data and all. Lack of longitudinal data. Suppose you want to do some sort of research, that we want to see the temporal change in certain pattern, so that data is not available. The website is only showing you the recent data, past data is not there. There is no such kind of archival. So mostly in such cases, like when you want to do longitudinal data, so you must rely on some of the secondary information, because it is a temporal study of the thing. Data privacy concern. So many a times the data is not being shared with the researcher because of the privacy. So for that also it is another challenge. Financial constraint, as already I have mentioned, if you have some data available but you need to purchase it, you have to procure it. Say for example, like you want to do some kind of special analysis and you need high resolution satellite image. It's very costly. Whatever we have in the open source, probably they will have certain resolution which can work up to certain level, the regional level and other level, but maybe if you want to do in much more detail uh, zone level, so probably you need to procure it, so which is again subject to the funding availability. So I am sure that in your case also you will find such kind of difficulties. So for that, definitely this is something we need to take care. When we are framing our questions, when we are identifying the data sources, we have to also look into this kind of aspect, right? Now, even if you get the data, okay, in some way, quality of data matters a lot, and then it's the reliability of the data and data sources. So inconsistency, inaccuracy in available data may compromise the validity of the findings. As I already mentioned, that if you only rely on some past data and then you are relying on the projected data, so there might be some sort of mismatch. So in incomplete data, you can say, then you have the inconsistency, data duplication. So inconsistency, normally you find that, okay, different kind of document, they are showing different kind of values for the similar aspect. Data duplication, many a times like there is duplicate entry, so which again is some kind of challenges. Maybe sometimes you will have certain outliers. So maybe you are going to go for a trend analysis, and then you will find that in the recorded data there is something, it may be actual one, or it may be sometimes the data is really the outlier. So in such kind of cases is the extreme low or extreme high value compared to others. So it will be very difficult to guess if there is no proper documentation why this is happening. Say for example, recently we were doing a particular research on tourism aspect, and we found that in a particular city, that in a particular year the footfall is 10 times than is usual, right? And then we try to understand this from different sources, and then we try to find out, okay, this particular year there was certain kind of mega event. So this is something what I'm telling you, that many a times it seems that the data is incomplete or erroneous if there is certain spike and all, but you should not leave that data unless otherwise, like you checked everything and then you nullified that one. So then we found that, okay, this is for the mega event, so this is some sort of outlier, and then accordingly in our analysis we have to consider that. There might be some kind of sampling bias when the data is available, how the sampling has been done. There might be measurement errors, that the instrument that we are using, that is faulty, the measurement is not correct, or the data, the way the sample has been selected, that is also not correct. Temporal variability. So suppose the data is collected in a particular time, say for example you want to understand the people's perception towards the walkability. Now you go and ask few questions to the people, and that is something like summer days, and you just ask that how comfortable you are walking in this particular street and all. If it is open ended, so they may give you the response, like it will not be same if you ask the same questions for the rainy situation, if you ask the question for a very cold chilled winter situation, or maybe a extreme summer situation. So in all cases the experience they will share or the perception they have, that will be different. So that should be clear in the data, the temporal variability of this. Or else, if I can give you another example, like if you do a spatial analysis, so satellite image, so suppose the images, they are being captured in certain regular interval. So you take up a particular map, okay, satellite image which is captured in some sort of monsoon. So in such cases, many of the agricultural fields, they are also having the water. So if you do a remote analysis, okay, and if you try to capture the index, the vegetation index and all, so maybe that may mislead to this particular thing, because it is showing water but it is actually the land. So we need to check that as well. Data collection methodology, that is also very important, which will determine the quality of data, that how you are going to do. As I already mentioned, if you want to do a perception based survey, so if you go for a total online survey, that there is no person involved in interacting with the respondent, there might be some kind of biases, and then there will be some drop in the quality. But it will depend on how you frame the questions. If it is very accurate, very direct, there is no ambiguity in the question, you may get some good result as well. So it all depends. So I cannot generalize that online questionnaire or online questioning is not good. It will be really effective if we can make it in that way. We'll discuss that in our lecture when we talk about different survey methods. Then we have the data security and privacy concern, which is something again quality of data that is there. Lack of metadata, that we have certain information but we don't have the backup data that to derive to that particular point. So we don't have any follow up data which is supporting it. So quality of data is another challenge in our field of planning and architecture, especially when we are relying on the information which is non-experimental based thing, where we depend on data. When we are experimenting it through experimental setup and all, so data creation is ours, like we will get the data out of the experiment. Interdisciplinary collaboration, planning and architecture involve multiple discipline, and collaboration between experts in different fields can be challenging. Why that will be challenging? One is the varying methodology. Suppose the way I think or the approach I have, maybe the other collaborator will have a different ideology. So there may be some kind of challenge. Differing objective and priorities, again, when there will be multiple person, the thinking may be going into different direction. I'm not saying who is correct, which is wrong, but there may be some kind of difference in opinion. Complexity of planning issues, again it relates to the priority. Communication gap, so that is also happening when the collaboration is happening long distance, and then maybe some sort of gap in communication. Policy and regulatory difference, if you want to make a collaboration in some of the city with the other city abroad, so where the regulation, especially like for the planning study and all, so regulation is something different. So somewhere the solution can work very quickly, the other it is not. So that will be also a problem. Community engagement challenges, then it's again whether they are ready to take part into this, or whether there is some sort of ethical thing. So many a times in our case, like in Indian scenario, we do a survey, we conduct respondent survey. So we don't find much issue, we just go and interact, but it is not same. Probably in European kind of cities and all, you need to have a proper ethical approval to interact to get the opinion. Even taking up public photographs is also subject to some kind of action against you if you don't have the permission. So such kind of things are there. Time and resource constraint, it's also there. So in many cases, like even if we want to do the collaboration, the time and the research is not managing the part. Interdisciplinary training gaps, the way things are being told or the way the two collaborators they are trained, probably there will be a mismatch. Data integration, so this is another common problem. So say for example, I'm doing a particular part of a research, and then other collaborator is doing a part, and then there will be a coherence, and merging them to come to a concrete or comprehensive solution is again a challenging one. Now coming to the sustainability integration part, here it is something where we are really aspire to make contribution to those SDG and all, but many a times we have certain kind of lack in understanding that okay, the scale of that particular measurement, like probably if I want to say that okay, I'll solve this particular SDG, I'll do everything with that SDG, it is not possible, because you have a particular time, you have certain resources. So within that, probably you have to be much more focused on that. So that's why I'm saying that incorporating sustainable practices into planning and architecture poses challenges, especially when balancing broad three pillars of sustainability, which is environmental, social, and economic factors. So, like that, in this case, what are the issues? Complexity of sustainability. Sustainability is a very big word, and many a times we misuse it, or just in sake of saying it, we just say that I want to do some kind of sustainable development. I go for this kind of sustainability thing, but it is very complex because it is all depending on each other, and balancing them, it's a question. Trade-off and conflicts, where to give more emphasis that maybe your solution will give much focus on the environment, but it's not very socially acceptable, or it is socially acceptable but environmentally it is not. Then other part is the short term and long term consideration, because it is not something like, if you take a sustainability approach, that energy, that particular energy conservation, or will reduce the energy, or say I can just go for some kind of example of the e-vehicle in the market. So the vision is very clear that slowly we'll go for the electric vehicle, so that will lower down the burden of the fossil fuels, which is very limited, as well as we can also contribute to that emission part, where like we'll have less emission. But in such cases also, it is not that today I just decide and tomorrow will get the result. It will take some time, the adaptation and all. So similarly, for that there are issues of the phasing it out, that short term and the long term consideration. Many a times we have limited resources, and by which you cannot make those kind of cases. Resistance to change. So this is something, many a times, like even if we know, but there are other unknown factors, or personal feeling of not adapting, or maybe it will not be really a good idea to go ahead with the e-vehicle, say for example. So those kind of things will have the resistance to change. So we have been very orthodox, and sometimes we just follow what we are doing. So we are not really thinking of, say now we are saying the autonomous vehicle, driverless vehicle, etc. So maybe it will take some time to get into those. Measuring and monitoring progress is another part, because again it is a big aspect of sustainability. Scale mismatch is another one, like where the broad aim probably the climate change, but maybe what we are doing is not really contributing to the climate change. It's a very small subset of that. So as because scale is mismatch, and if we try to fit into, so maybe that argument will not be clear to the scientific community, and that may give you some sort of negative feedback to your research, that okay, whatever you are promising, probably what you have done, it's not matching. So it's better to understand the scope, and accordingly we should work. Now coming to the community engagement, where we need to deal with the community, their perception. So balancing the diverse interest perspective within the community is often the complex task. It is something like it is, you just go and say going for a birthday party. Suppose you are going to give a treat to your friends. So there are two ways that you can go and then order something very fixed thing, that you ordered pizza or something, and then everybody will have, or else you ask that what you want to have. So in that case you may have multiple opinion, right? So in such cases balancing out is very difficult, and normally if the group is little more, so then you may get certain kind of challenges as well. Similarly, for such kind of research, when you ask the perspective, so you may get different opinions, so collating that is very difficult task. So one of the challenges is the inclusivity challenge. So include all type of people, all age group, all socioeconomic background, to come up with that solution. Communication barrier is always there, like in some cases, like the way the researcher communicate and the way they understood, if you go for such kind of grassroots level research, there is some kind of issue. Trust. So many a times, people do not respond to your questions because they have very low trust on you, that what you are doing. So to give that confidence, whatever you are doing, that will have certain kind of betterment. Another thing is another challenge. Timing and scheduling the conflicts. So in this case, you know the time management is very important, that when you interact and all, when to communicate, how to communicate, that is there. Many a times the issues with the limited resources, so that you cannot really do the experiment again and again, so there is a gap. Then overcoming resistance is another issue, that suppose if already people have determined that they are not going to do it, so then asking them, convincing them to the new challenges or new opportunities is difficult. Data interpretation and utilization for community response, as because it is very diverse, and if you go for open ended questions, you can come up with different kind of interview, so then collating them is a difficult task. Post engagement follow up, it's not right that you just take some information from the community and then you try to derive a strategy. After deriving the strategy, you have to have follow up interaction, so that whatever you have understood, whether you understood it correctly or not, that need to be checked. So many a times that is becoming a challenge. Now the other part is the regularity constraint. So adhering to the zoning law, say for example, particular to the architectural and planning thing, that building codes or other regulation can limit the creative solutions. So you may come up with a very beautiful, very efficient building, but maybe that building is not really possible, and the clearance of that particular building design is not permitted due to some regulatory thing. So in that case, it may be the rigidity of that particular law and inflexibility, that it is not flexible. There may be some kind of complexity and overlap of the ideas. Many a times the approval, it will take a long time to get it, so that you are losing your research time. Cost implication, if your project is getting delayed, research is getting delayed, so that will have the cost implication. Historic preservation requirement, many a times, this is something that, you are stuck with certain solution, because if the city is having some historical value, you have to adhere that. So there is some constraint to that. Environmental impact, definitely we cannot ignore it. Each project should have certain kind of assessment. Lack of alignment with innovation, so many times it is something that, as new innovative idea, new technology, they are not fit into the current, framework or under the regulation. So then that is the problem. Public participation requirement, many a times we don't get that, good participation voluntary, which can lead to some kind of issues in our research. Now coming next, that is the technological advancement. So keeping up with rapidly evolving technology to develop solutions for a problem is another challenge. So in this case, what is happening? The rapid obsolescence, that as I already mentioned earlier, that you are trying to develop a technology to solve certain kind of problem, and then the by time that you are going to launch your product, by that time there are other few products are coming into the picture in the market. So then this is something that we have to have. Suppose if somebody is trying to develop any such kind of technology, should be very much updated like that. Then the access and affordability, that even if you have something, so our idea that if our intended users are common people, how we can make it like accessible and affordable to the people, and for that it is again a challenging thing, and for that you need more input. Then other part is the data security and privacy concern, because if you are developing something, some application, some technology which involves the data, personal data and all, so you have to be very sure how to use it, where to use it, and then maintaining the privacy. Digital inequality, so this is something, the digital divide, where you cannot expect that everyone okay, is very much acquainted with the digital platform and all. So for that there is a gap, and then conducting research on that field may create a gap between the people, which is having less access to the digital environment. Training and skill gap, the similar way that where thing can uh, create some kind of gap. Suppose something is a implementable thing, that you provide a solution that to be tested on ground, but people they do not know how to use it. So then that is something creating problem to your research as well. Ethical consideration, it is very important that the data security and data privacy is really important, so that is also creating challenge. Community engagement challenge is again to make them aware of the upcoming technology and all, because people may get scared that okay, if I do this thing, what will be the case or something, especially when you are going for some kind of experiment with the sensor and all. So convincing people will be very difficult, right? What data you are capturing and how to use it. Public perception and acceptance to the solution and all, it's another challenging part. Now coming to the next, the budgetary constraint, which is one of the most important constraint for our case, where you have the balancing the economic consideration with design aspiration is very challenging. Limited funding opportunity, because in some cases like you don't get funding for conducting research or upscaling the research, so resulting that your research is very limited, very case specific. Resource scarcity, you don't have much resources, and definitely in that case this is the result of low fund or low, like you less fund. Personal and expertise, you cannot use more. Suppose you want in your research you want to involve more person, more research staff and all, unless otherwise you have the budget, you cannot do this, so which essentially elongating the time. Field work and site visit, you have to limit yourself, because then you cannot scale up with that low budget. Data collection costs also should be minimized, which may hamper the quality of research. Technology and software expenses will also be curtailed. As I mentioned that, many of us may be very fortunate that we belong to some good institution where we don't have such problem of using the software or the experimental setup, but there are researchers who are finding this very difficult in their cases. Publication and dissemination cost, in many cases, like that is something very important. Long term research sustainability is also questioned, because if we don't have fund in some kind of experimental thing, we cannot do much. Implementation challenges is also difficult, we cannot develop such kind of thing or upscaling. Cost overruns is another issues, that the anticipated thing, if you are having shortage at the middle of your research and you don't have the funding, so that can hold your research back, and that may lead to like shorten or modifying your scope of your research. Now coming to the lack of access to the research facility. So in this case already I mentioned that subscription to the journal access, because this is important for the literature review, and many a times we do not have such kind of access. Computing system, we do not have proper computer or some kind of workstation to do it. Access to software which is required for data analysis, we don't have that kind of experimental setup, so which is something I can show you, tell you the evidence, like during that COVID lockdown phase, for almost 1.5 years, for all institutions the student got stuck into their home and were involved in that experimental study, their research lacks that time, because they cannot do it at their home, because it is the experimental setup. Survey instrument, it is again that definitely if we don't have those kind of measuring instrument, say some kind of measurement tools that you use on site, so then you cannot perform that. Limited collaboration opportunities is sometimes there, so our idea is very limited and confined, so that it's not having that kind of collaboration. Research funding is another, like unless otherwise you have proper lab access, proper facility, you cannot also go for some kind of proposal or project writing, research project writing, where you can showcase that you have so many resources to take up the project. So that is also another loss. Reduce data collection opportunities, definitely if you don't have that particular access, so then that can also lead to this. Now coming to the time constraint, so it is also limited the research time frames. We have to make a very within small frame. Then inadequate time for data collection, because you have to do so many things in small time. Pressure on experimental studies, if your experiment fails or something, so and time is given for certain activity, so it will be pressure. Limited opportunity for a iterative design, then in that case what is something that we don't do much experiment and we just say that within time frame I have to give something, so I am giving it. So which is also giving some challenges on reduced review and revision time. Challenges in literature review, because you don't have time to do that. Limited collaboration time. Impact on supervision also, sometimes it is very limited. So as I said that many a times the master student, they are also doing research, but 1 year. So for that the topic should be such that it should be like manageable in 1 year. It's not like a PhD program which can lead up to 3 years 4 year program. Increase stress and burnout whenever you have the time constraint. This is another important aspect. Say your paper is not getting accepted, your experimental results are not coming the way you want, or it is not being successful. And then risk of superficial solution, so this is something dangerous. Many a times due to time constraint, we just try to wrap up things knowing that it is superficial, so that is dangerous and we should take care of that. Now for that we need proper or appropriate research methodology which will help you to identify the research gap, identifying research questions, framing the hypothesis for your research, type of data that you require, which survey method that you want to do, then sample size which can give you the satisfactory or representative data for you, sampling technique, proper research method, reporting of your research, timeline and budget. So this is a complete package. In previous lecture we have also understood that the importance of research methodology. That is something that you all need to work on. So we all need to work on the methodology. We have to spend time on that. Once we make this proper, our whole journey in research will be much more easier, right? So again summarizing this, in this case we have discussed about different issues and challenges of conducting research, starting from availability of data, quality of data, interdisciplinary collaboration issue, sustainability integration issue with the community engagement, then issues the regulation and constraint, issue to cope up with the technological advancement, budget constraint, time constraint, and then also the lack of the research facilities. And then for that the approach that to frame a good methodology. So with that I conclude here. Hope this is very useful, and in our subsequent discussion we will also try to see that how to overcome those constraints. What are the alternatives that we can take in such cases, that when you have this kind of issues with the data and all. So these are the further reading. With that I thank you. So we'll come up with our next lecture which is on the research process. Thank you for joining. See you soon.